Good evening. Welcome to the broadcast. Today is Tuesday, March 28th, 2017. I want to tell you something to begin with that I think is very interesting about this webinar. You know, on average, we have a dozen or so people that will RSVP. Usually we average around 30 participants or so, give or take. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's a few less, and of course, many watch it by archive. But one of the most interesting things about this title of this webinar is we had by a large multiple, more people RSVP to this webinar than we've ever had before in the 9 years that I've been doing this, 9.5 years that I've been doing this. And I think what that tells me is how drawn we are to the idea of how do we change our child's mind. So tonight I'm going to talk about how we do that. And for most of us, almost everything I'm going to tell you is counterintuitive. And this is not me punting, but I will give you a sneak peek or a preview or a cheat to what I'm going to talk about tonight, which is, in essence, to be the most powerful and influential in trying to change our child's mind. We try not to do that. We do something else. So what this is this is a conglomeration from about 4 webinars and the fact that I just got back from a California swing of parent meetings where I was aware of and constantly conscious of the question that parents have: how can I get my child to change? And I think that makes sense because your children are doing unhealthy things, unsafe things. And so they're here at our program, or they've been at our program because you have those concerns. So tonight it's going to be what all the things that I've learned. And I won't probably touch on every single detail, but generally speaking, all the things I've learned to be most effective at encouraging and facilitating change in others, specifically in this case, in our children. And the reason I put this out there to you all is because I think I think sometimes we misunderstand the skills, the tools, the idea, the concepts that we're presented with. I borrowed this cartoon from somebody else. It's actually printed in my book also. And I think that sometimes as parents we have this idea that if we just are more clear with our children, right? So many of us want to say more to our children, specifically as we become equipped to talk about our feelings and our thoughts more precisely with a better skill set. Then we're sure that that's going to make the difference. This cartoon that I have listed before you shows 2 parents looking down at their young son with a child psychology book behind their back, and in quotes the caption says, "Don't you realize, Jason, that when you throw your furniture out the window and tie your sister to a tree, you make mommy and daddy very sad?" And again, I think that's kind of what we think, right? So many times, even in the field, in the wilderness, I've heard staff or therapists ask the child, "Have you told your parents how you felt?" And that's a great question. And I think it's important to talk about how we feel. But part of what I've put the pause on that with, even to the child, let alone the parent, is say, and they might not change, right? They might not do anything different. You can tell them how they feel. And so most importantly, we don't think of communication tools as a more effective way to manipulate, to change other people. That's key. In fact, the older I get and the more experience I have, the more often I encourage parents to say less and less to their children about their feelings, or at least not hand them over. One of the skills that I suggest that parents share is they say, "Here's my feeling about the situation, but it's not about you. It's my responsibility." And repeating that message over and over and over again when you're anxious, when you're upset, when you have an expectation that's not met, that you own that. It's not the child's job to manage your serenity. It's not the child's job to manage your anxiety. Right? These are fundamental principles from child development that we know that aren't taught in our culture. I think our culture often teaches just the opposite. I think our culture teaches that it's a child's job to make their parents proud. And while that might be somebody's framework, that's not what psychologists teach. That's not what we know about children and their development. And that's not what we know about parenting. So what this comes from is from my years of experience. Some of it you may not like or may not understand it. And it might not feel like you can do it. It might not feel like you're going to be able to accomplish it. It might be beyond you. But it's okay to take this in incremental steps. And what I hope and encourage is that you continue to listen. Not just to me in the webinars and the podcast, but that you listen to other people that you trust, that you have some confidence in, that they know something. And you listen to this new way of thinking. When you listen to people at Al-Anon or Codependence Anonymous or Families Anonymous, when you listen to your therapist, part of what I think we're trying to accomplish, ideally in those contexts, is to teach you how to think about it differently, to teach you what it's like to be in a relationship with a child in a healthy way. And most of us weren't taught that. The psychology, the science behind what I'm going to talk about tonight is well beyond previous generations, right? It's not in popular culture. And it's only in situations oftentimes where parents come to this place where their children are struggling at this level, where they're asked to look at these kinds of things and to consider these kinds of options in this way of thinking. You know, I think I've told some of you that you've heard me talk about this before with my book, that I was reluctant to put a behavioral chapter in the book because it's not too complex, and I'm not going to reintroduce in some kind of new way behavioral theory. At the same time, I thought you need to have that in there. You need to, if for no other reason than to explain how simple it is, you need to talk about, you just need to put it out there. And then after I do that, I need to talk about the foundation underneath this. I need to talk about some associated principles. So like I talk about in the book, I'm going to talk about that tonight. This is a basic behavioral model, operant conditioning. And there are basically 4 quadrants, right, where you're adding a response or you're taking away a response. And you're either trying to get behavior to increase or repeat itself, or trying to get behavior to decrease. And we can all imagine various examples in these 4 quadrants, right? We can imagine that punishment is a negative response in order to see behavior extinguish or go away or subside. We look at reward as a positive response to have behavior increase. The worst part of punishment, there's 2 parts of punishment that are difficult, that are challenging, and why we might have not the best of opinions about it, and that is these 2 ideas. Number 1, it can be cathartic. That's not a good thing. In other words, it can come from a place of anger or from a place of revenge or vindictiveness. It comes from a place of release. And that's not, none of those motives, none of those origins benefit the child. None of that is about the child. So that's one of its risks. And at a basic scientific level, the other weakness of punishment is it doesn't tell somebody what to do. People, in fact, learn to avoid the punishment but not the behavior. We're all conditioned, right? It happened to me twice while I was in California this week. I wasn't even speeding, but I saw a cop and I automatically hit the brake. And I'm going the speed limit. So we learn to avoid the punishment, but we don't stop speeding, for example. I don't speed just because I don't speed, but that's just an example about how we can adjust to it, and we're not really making any progress. But I think parents get held hostage by punishment, right? They think of it as punitive, and it can be. I can't tell you how many times over the years I've had a child say to a parent, through a letter or on a phone call, "You're just punishing me." And my response would be to the child, "What's your point?" Punishment is one of the ways that we can influence and impact behavior, right? There are laws and punishments, and they impact our behavior. It's a lower level of moral development, but it can be effective, especially in situations that are urgent or time sensitive or life threatening, right? You don't want a child to run out into the street, so you're going to scold them from running out into the street. You're going to stop them from doing that. So, but it has its weaknesses and its limitations, and I don't think that necessarily means that parents need to be held hostage by it or paralyzed by it. It's okay, right? If your child goes over their cell phone bill 3 months in a row after discussions and other things, what is everyone on this webinar going to imagine themselves doing in an ideal situation? they're going to take away the cell phone. They're going to charge the child with some chores to work it off, right? That's common sense. It's just we need to be aware of those other things. The other thing that maybe there's two more important principles in the psychology of this. The first one is functional analysis. It's part of behavioral theory. Functional analysis is understanding the context. Functional analysis, simply put, is a method for identifying the purpose, context, and unique characteristics of a behavior, as well as the features that reinforce or maintain the behavior. So that's why simple behavioral theory doesn't always work, because there might be another need that's getting met that we don't recognize. Attention could be one thing. Separation from parents. The cathartic feeling that a child has at defying a parent and getting back at them, revenge. There could be, we can imagine a whole host of reasons why somebody's doing the behavior. So simple behavioral reinforcement might not address all of those things. But it's important that we begin to understand them. Because I remember from graduate school, my first semester in graduate school, they presented a case study to demonstrate functional analysis, where they asked all of the students at a junior high, I believe it was, in a wealthy county in San Diego, a wealthy county. They offered them a reward for returning library books that were overdue or lost or that had been taken. And they had very little response. And when they went to the student body president, vice president, the student body board, government, they asked them, what's the deal? And the student body officer said, people in this school don't care about $5. Well, what do they care about? The student body officers were asked. Well, if you give them, for example, one day when they can dress in their own PE clothes for working out, you're going to see a lot of books come back. So they changed the policy and they gave each child a pass that they could have a day or a certain amount of time where they didn't have to dress in the school issued PE clothes. And they saw record numbers of books coming back. It was understanding the context, right? And so it's important that we understand that. I talk about in the book, using behavioral tools is fine. This is the header of the behavioral chapter. Using behavioral tools is fine, but only if they are nested in love and awareness. And we would be wise to first listen to what the behavior is telling us before we launch into changing it. And we can become behavior focused. And we can forget as people and parents, because the behavior is threatening, it's frightening, it's worrisome, and that blinds us to this idea, this ability to look beyond it, especially if you're a parent. That's why, as I've said many times, therapists are better positioned often to provide that objective experience for the child and for the family. And in many cases, you might be able to do that for my children where I could not. So we look at, we try to listen to it, right? That's where this behavioral theory and this communication theory, specifically listening, connect with each other, overlap with each other. Because if you can provide a safe place, a safe container, which means that you're going to have to manage your anxiety, right? If a child comes to you and says, I'm experimenting with this or that, I'm doing this, I did that, and your response is, you know, metaphorically or literally, if it's, then your child quickly and aptly recognizes that you're not safe. They then are aware that they are being asked to take care of you. So you have that feeling inside, but you deal with it somewhere else. You have a therapist, you have a support group, you have a sponsor, you have trusted colleagues, you have partners in co-parenting ideally, where you get to manage that. And you let that inform you, but you don't live out of it, right? Because then you're not safe. It's not denial, right? It's qualitatively different. You're not saying, I don't see it, I only see the positive. You're saying, this is going in a certain direction, and the odds are it might blow up. And I'm going to be as aware as I can. I'm going to be informed by it. I'm going to run it through what I call the parent filter, and I'm going to make decisions based on that information. Fear can wake us up, can motivate us to start, but we can't live by it. It's not long-term fuel for mental health and responses to others, especially our children. So in functional analysis, we learn to, Identify the function of the behavior. What are the consequences that maintain the behavior? So when your child is presenting with symptoms, right? And symptoms that show a pattern become diagnoses. When we look at their diagnoses, what does that diagnosis tell us about us? What needs aren't getting met? And we have compassion for, and empathy and understanding for even the behavior that looks so off-putting, so offensive, so contrary to what we believe. And we work with people to be able to have that capacity and develop that capacity. And when we show up that way in our parenting, we're safe. And we want to be the safe ones, right? We want to be the people that our children use as a resource. But we can't be a resource if we're compromised in the ways that I'm describing that fear and anxiety does to us. What does the individual get by doing the behavior? What does the individual avoid by doing the behavior? The primary gain of a behavior is how it alleviates some kind of discomfort or anxiety in me. The secondary gain is how does my environment reward me? And I even talk about this with things like depression. I have the clients write papers on what are the benefits of depression, right? And part of that is for them to be aware that if you remove somebody's symptom, there's going to be a hole there, a gaping wound there, small or large. And somehow that has to be healed and addressed. So just stripping somebody of their defenses doesn't work. In fact, it's akin to cutting a root off at the surface. Excuse me, cutting a weed off at the surface. The root of it is still there. It's going to pop up somewhere else in the garden. This is from the webinar, the chapter of my book on control versus influence. And succinctly put, I want to say this as clearly as I can. I talked about this in both the Los Angeles and in the San Francisco parent meeting this week. Decisions around structure and strictness are not the solution. I can't be more clear. They don't solve the equation. They are the evidence, ideally, the evidence of our truth. They rise out of our truth. What we believe, what we feel, what we know, our awareness, our love, our concern, our compassion, our support. And so when you ask me or anybody, what should I do about X? It's a nearly impossible question to answer. It's going to be followed up with, what's your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? What's your intention behind this? And then we start to analyze, right? We start to dissect that process of what's going on for you. And then we talk about the effectiveness of that particular decision meeting your goal. And so in the end, therapy is ideally, or parent coaching, and I think there's a lot of overlap in the way that I do it, is to find your truth for you. So if the question is, should I let my daughter who's just home from aftercare go to a concert where there are going to be drugs and alcohol? I don't know the answer to that question because I don't know the goal. I don't know how you feel. I don't know your truth. And if the thought is, this is clear, if the thought is making that decision one way or the other is going to determine or cause the continued sobriety or relapse of your daughter, you can't get it right. And yet, if you think about it in terms of what's my truth, what's my healthy self-care, what's my boundary, you can't get it wrong. So what we've learned about structure and strictness is that it's not necessarily equated to control. In fact, the most permissive parents that I've dealt with are controlling. How can that be true? Because most people equate and think that control and strictness, high levels of strictness, are synonymous. Absolutely not. They can be, but most permissive parents are controlling because they use emotional manipulation. And they're trying to get an outcome. They're always looking for that silver bullet. It's up to them for their child to get it right. And think about that. If you live as if it's up to you, it makes all the sense in the world that your child both overtly and innately blames you. Because that's the culture, that's the psychology that he or she is living in. If it's about you getting it right, then your child is right to blame you and to make you responsible for his and her successes and failures. And we know that just commonsensically that doesn't make any sense. We don't want that. But Good parenting is its own reward. Good living is its own reward. Finding and expressing your authentic truth is its own reward. Showing up in relationships, honestly, authentically, compassionately, creatively, open, all of those things, and I can add more to that list, that's its own reward. And that's what we're trying to develop here. And it's an interesting dialectical, right? Because what we're trying to teach is this idea that you can be completely accountable for all the things that I just said, how you do and don't show up in those ways, and you cannot be accountable for how the child responds. That's psychology, folks. That's the ingredient of healthy attachment. That is seeing an other person as other. That is honoring their otherness. And most of us, because of our fear and anxiety, because we don't want to hurt, and we hurt when our children hurt, we try to control outcomes. And we go through life asking questions about what should we do. And that's based in, if I do X or Y, it will turn out well, and if I don't, it won't. And I think even therapists and programs sometimes reinforce that blame game. And I don't think it's appropriate, healthy, kind, compassionate. I don't think it's very aware. So I developed this model where I pulled apart the level of strictness and the level of influence. And I said that, children in our program, for example, at Evoke Wilderness Therapy Program, for most of them, this is the highest level of strictness that they've ever experienced in their life. You have to count your name when you go to the bathroom, just so we know you're safe. That's a high level of strictness. You're not allowed to talk to a peer outside of a staff's earshot. Staff have to be around. You can't go off and have a dyadic conversation with a peer. There's rules for cooking times and getting ready and waking up and hiking and making fire by rubbing. I mean, there's so many rules. High level of supervision and structure. And yet many of my students over the years have said it's the freest place they've ever been in their life. And some have said, after having this kind of shift, this spiritual shift that we're talking about tonight, even for the parents, that they've never felt so free and liberated. And in some ways, it was the easiest thing they'd ever done. Those children who say those things, and they don't all say that, but those children who get that, what I realize is they're tuning into the fact that it's not about trying to make them feel or think. We let them feel or think what they want. We have consequences and limits, but we don't let them, we have consistency around the consequences. They don't have to like it. They don't have to agree with it. Most parents will try to argue, debate, beg, promise, intimidate, guilt, right? If we can get our child to a place where they think and believe what we want them to think and believe, to choose what we want them to choose, then we don't have to embark on the most difficult part in all relationships, and maybe mostly in parenting, which is setting a boundary where we are then not liked, not looked up to, not appreciated. And that inability to do that comes from our own childhood woundedness. Somebody's asking for more specifics. I'm going to get into the kind of the do's and don'ts. But this is some of the philosophy that's behind it. So when I talk about controlling, I'm talking about emotionally coercive parenting, rigid lack of flexibility, enmeshed, reactive to each other. Enmeshed is kind of an over-identification with, looking for balance and serenity outside of yourself. Blurred boundaries, not clear on where you stop and somebody else starts. Trying to talk somebody into thinking a certain way. Not being okay with somebody being upset. Not knowing what you have control over and what you don't. Threatening, intimidating, overvaluing choice. Too much energy or punitive. All excuses for boundaries. Undervaluing choice, excuse me. Right? In other words, I get to decide my stuff, my response, and you get to decide how you react. And in either way, it's a win. Because if you eat your vegetables, you can have dessert. If you don't eat your vegetables, you don't get dessert. And those can be, of course, extrapolated to bigger decisions. You can be sober and have our support, or you can live on your own. That's not a threat or an intimidation. That's self-care. And I'm fine either way. I can make peace, at least, with either way. but I can't do it this way anymore. Can't do it the way that we've been doing it anymore. Influential parenting, these are just my terms that I've coined, is grounded in self-awareness. Honesty with self is at its highest level, right? It's my awareness. I had a parent say to me today that they were trying to in all of their choices and relationships ask more and more, and it'll become second nature to you to ask what your intent is. It won't be as laborious, as effortful. After a while, you just kind of know. You just kind of know what your intention is. And so what feels like a lot of work and can be exhausting in the early phases of therapy becomes automatic later. But anytime we make that shift in our paradigms, in our behavior, in our sensibility, it's going to be work. We own our own feelings and reactions. Right? We don't put them on our child. We don't ask our child to own our feelings. Simply put, you don't tell your child you're upset with them so that they'll stop doing whatever they're doing so you're not upset anymore. You don't tell them that you're scared that they're doing heroin. You don't tell them that you're disappointed so they think it's their job to make you proud and do X, Y, or Z. You don't do those things. You own that responsibility. That's yours to manage, not their responsibility. You focus on self-regulation. This is the key, right? If we focus on what we can do, and all the stuff I'm talking about tonight is what we can do. If we focus on this, we'll be more hopeful and optimistic and less depression, less anxious, less in a power struggle. So if we focus on self, right, which is counterintuitive, when I could almost say in general that when people ask me how to deal with a struggling child, I could almost say in a blanket statement, do your own work. I don't say that because that's not very instructive, but that's the essence of it. Figure this out. Figure out why you're struggling with this and figure out how to respond to it. It's just a symbolic moment that's evidence that you're struggling with a certain kind of relationship. Influential parenting is assertive, brave. It's a willingness to feel things that are painful. These are all hallmarks of influential parenting. We think less rigidly, and we have balance. We also have connection. Connection is separateness and seeing otherness and having compassion, not reactive and not rigid. We value autonomy. One of the ideas that I think I've seen over the years, now the decades, in working with families, is some of the families that are struggling don't value mistakes as much. Families that move through the process and are doing well value the struggles and the mistakes just as much as the successes, maybe even more so. They adopt a we'll see attitude. It's not painless and effortless, but they see the value in the child making a mistake. Influential parents make serenity your project. Make your life your project, right? Don't make your life your project fixing the kid. That's not your project. That's their project. And as a parent, your project is being a healthy, and the phrase I'm using tonight, an influential parent. That's your project. And remembering that the goal of therapy is the development of self. And development of self isn't about making the right choices. Development of self is finding yourself, knowing yourself, and feeling, and that requires one to feel okay about themselves. In my book, I say we learn to let go and trust ourselves as parents by focusing on our intentions, feelings, and objectives, rather than obsessing over whether our actions will accomplish those objectives. So we don't do what I call kind of aiming at the target therapy, or aiming at the target parenting. We trust our throw. For those of you who are involved in art, perhaps even in business, sports, you know what it means to be in the flow, right? But if you start aiming your craft, it doesn't work. You lose creativity, you lose flexibility, you lose the skill set actually in some circumstances. So learning to trust your swing, so to speak. So here are some of the do's and don'ts. The do's of influential parenting, of parenting that facilitates the change in a child. Boundaries. Now, this is a tricky one because you've got to do the boundary without thinking that it's going to change the child. You've got to do the boundary because the boundary itself is healthy self-care, right? This is the thing that I teach parents to say. This is what I feel comfortable with or not. And like I talk about, it's not about being right, it's about being you. The problem for humans is that being us wasn't enough in our growing up. We had to be right. But we're learning in this work at Evoke that being you is enough. You get to be you. So you start showing up with healthy boundaries. I don't feel comfortable with you doing that. I don't feel comfortable with you going out. I can't support that. This is my limit. And it's about me, and I'm okay with that. And then children learn to respond to other. They learn by virtue of somebody that has healthy boundaries, they actually learn empathy. Right? They become less self-centered because they have to respond to this imperfect human being that they call mom and dad that has limitations. That's actually okay and healthy. If children had unlimited parents with unlimited capacity, they wouldn't learn things like frustration tolerance and delay of gratification. They wouldn't have to even consider an other. So boundaries, they do a lot of good things, but we don't do them to change people. We do them because they're the right thing to do for us. We teach by experience. What I mean by that is the child learns, it's not by our lectures. The children have your lectures. All the children that come to our program, for the most part, have all of your lectures memorized. They're good at giving them to other people. But experience changes people. Experience is how children learn. They're not as verbal as we are. So what we think makes sense and then how we learn is not necessarily how we learn. Besides the fact that, isn't it true for all of us that a lot of us know more than we can do? Why is that? I'll put myself in that category. I know 10 times more than I'm capable of doing in a given day. So it's more than just a data or an intellectual exercise. Experience is what changes us. We learn to show up in the way that I've described. Authentically, compassionately, patiently, reflexively. We learn to listen and validate, and we learn to contain. That's what children need from a parent. We learn to manage our side of the street, to not obsess about our child. We learn there is plenty of room in all of us, for all of us. There's plenty of room for us to be cleaning up our side of the street. That's what they say in Al-Anon. Stay on your side of the street. And ironically, this is this crazy thing. When a parent or a sibling or a spouse shows up in a relationship with focus on self, it invites the other person to change. It models it for them. It increases vulnerability and safety in the relationship. It does all of those things that we all want to do. It does all of those things that I said by the title of this production, Changing Your Child Minds. It does all of those things most effectively. And yet it's a circuitous route, right? It's not intuitive. You know, we apply pressure. I know it's a simple example, and I don't want to be too trite, but it's the difference between Darth Vader and between Yoda, right? Both are trying to influence the universe in the way that they want it to go. One is using force and coercion, and one is surrendering and letting go. And we watched that story of Star Wars, and George Lucas knew this stuff. That's why his stuff resonates so powerfully. I was reading a quote today by Yoda, and it said, fear comes from the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. And hate is the dark side, right? And so when something tragic happens in Yoda's life, what does he do? He cries. When something tragic happened in Darth Vader's life, Anakin Skywalker's, what did he do? He turned up the control, right? Anakin's wife died. That's the last thing that happened before he turned into Darth Vader in the series. Star Wars is a metaphor for our response to others in life, to pain, to sadness, to difficulties, right? That's what it is. And it's a simplistic metaphor, but it's basically giving us that fork in the road about which path are we going to choose. An influential parent is vulnerable and accountable. Parents that are afraid to be accountable for their mistakes, right? What are they modeling? What are they really teaching? And the underneath the table message is what gets taught. If we're afraid to be vulnerable and accountable because we're afraid our child is going to use it against us, that's how they feel. But if we surrender that, I always say, if you're accountable for your stuff and authentic with that accountability, nobody can use it against you because you're not asking for anything back. You're not asking them to honor it, to like it, to appreciate it. You're doing it because it is its own reward. It is a gift of love to be accountable. So we show up courageously, vulnerably, accountably when we are influential. And then you make your project you. You make your recovery you. Even if your child doesn't abuse substances. If I can borrow the model of recovery for everybody tonight. Their addiction is X or Y, drugs, cutting, sex, defiance, compulsive lying, whatever their drug is, if you will, their drug of choice, the thing that they use to medicate against pain and insecurity, sadness and powerlessness, whatever that is, that's their drug. Our drug is controlling them. And we have all the same rationalizations, all the same justifications, all the same reasons for not doing our work that they do. So the best thing that we can do to encourage the change in their mind is to change our mind. And that's what Gandhi said when he said, be the change you wish to see in the world. One of the most oft quoted quotes about this topic. Be the change you wish to see in the world. Show me. Let me experience what it's like to be with somebody who lives this kind of way, this kind of loving, courageous way. This is simple. I mean, these are almost just matter of fact. Don't debate. Don't argue. Don't intimidate. Don't threaten. Begging, nagging, guilting, shaming, sharing feelings for the purpose of changing somebody. Even reasoning or talking or lecturing. Those are not effective tools in the facilitation of changing somebody's mind. They can at times, some of those, augment the change, give language to the change, but that's not how we do it. But we often, all of us, resort to those things because they're easier than the hard work. They soothe our fear. They give us a pseudo sense of control. And if we can control somebody else, we can feel okay inside, right? That's the thing. That's what this addiction of codependency is. It's an addiction to controlling something outside of me because what I feel inside of here is so unmanageable and so out of control. So those are kind of the do's and don'ts of it. Now, I want to make sure that I pause right now because nobody lives this ideal. Nobody does. So I'm going to use this analogy that I've used before. This is the ideal. This fist represents the ideal. This fist represents, 6 inches away, 8 inches away. It represents what I do, what I'm inclined to do, what I did yesterday. And there's a space in between these two fists. I'm holding out in front of my face if you're watching the webinar. If you're listening on the podcast, it's two fists about 8 inches apart. And the stuff in between, the space in between, is your work. Why can't I respond like Yoda, like Gandhi, like Mother Teresa, like the Buddha? It's okay that I can because I'm human. Some of them are even human. It's okay that I can because that's me, and then I have work to do. Doesn't make me bad or wrong. It just means I have that work to do. When we can embrace that idea, that concept, without shame and guilt, we can grow and do better. And showing up that way in the lives of our children is a huge gift and blessing. You show up as a more complete and whole adult in this way, nothing can be more helpful and supportive in your child's development and evolution than that. So that's the work that we do. We begin to understand what the ideal looks like. We begin to understand that when our child tells us they hate us, or they're angry at us, or they think we're horrible, or that we don't love them. We begin to see them, to understand them, to be able to listen, to honor them. We don't make it about us. We get rid of the need to be good. Right? These are the barriers to being able to do all that I've said. The need to be good, to be liked, to be viewed as a successful father or mother. Those get in the way. Those needs you have get in the way of taking care of your children. Fear and anxiety, of course, get in the way of taking care of your children. The need to be loved by your child gets in the way of you being there for your child. Your fear of abandonment. When I say this out loud all the time, I always think of this as kind of, it's remarkable because it's true for us. I felt it. I felt all of these things before. That's why I can write this webinar. We worry about our kids abandoning us. That's backwards thinking. That need not be our consideration. That's about our own abandonment issues. That's about us being alone. Love is about how can I be there to support you. I don't even ask the question, are you going to abandon me? I ask the question, what can I do to support you? And if I feel okay about it, I'll do my best. And Alice Miller talks about, she's the one that wrote Drama, the Gifted Child, the most important book, in my opinion, on child development, written in the last 50 years, 60 years. She talked about parents are really asking for something from their child that they didn't get from their parents. And it's not appropriate. That's not the direction of energy of love in a parent-child relationship. It's down, parent down at the child. Not about what they give to us. Their mental health is not measured by if they like us or love us or respect us or admire us. It's not even about us. That's what the author of the Four Agreements teaches us. It's not even about us. It's about them. And when we can see that, because we're managing all of these needs that I've listed, then we can see them. If what they say is a simple reflection of us, it's going to get in the way. If we have these needs unchecked, if we're relying on our children to meet some of these needs, we're going to have a very difficult time listening to our child, seeing them, and responding to them in a supportive way to help them with their needs. If we want them to feel or think a certain thing, that's a barrier. For example, I want my children to feel loved, or that I'm fair, right? I can't control. I had a dad who did everything in the world to try to get his kid to feel loved and cared about. And guess what his kid complained about all the time? My dad doesn't love me. I mean, this dad went to the ends of the earth for his son, to a fault, because he was invested in getting his kid to feel loved. And I said to him, you can't control whether your kid feels loved. You can only control loving your kid. And that's not semantics. I'm not being a tricky psychologist. It's true. It's basic logic. I can control loving you. I can't control whether you feel loved or not. If you tell me you don't, I can listen and be informed by that, ask myself questions. That's the parent filter, the adult filter that I was discussing. But I can't control whether you think that I'm invested or that I care. I can only control whether I am invested or if I care. So again, we change our focus. It's subtle, but it's important. And believe me, folks, it makes a drastic difference in our relationships. Alice Miller said it this way in Drama, the Gifted Child. We then realize that all of our lives, we have feared and struggled to ward off something that cannot happen any longer. It has already happened at the very beginning of our lives while we were completely dependent. So much of what blocks us, what gets in the way, and I don't want to be too extreme, but I can say so very, very much of what gets in the way of effective and healthy parenting. So much of it is in the context of our own childhood, in the wounds of our own childhood. In my book, I say children can adjust to high levels of structure. I've seen them thrive within very strict structures. What they often cannot adjust to is a parent who tries to impose a belief, opinion, philosophy, or feeling onto his child. Parenting skills and principles don't change children, they change parents. That change in a parent can have a very powerful, positive impact on the child. Parents who come to me and said, I've done all of this, I've done everything that you're talking about. Some will say that. And it hasn't worked. My response to this is, and this is again from the book, so let's explore this question. What if you do everything right and it still doesn't work? It is critical to remember that it is not about you. Healthy parenting is its own reward. It creates a better life for you and for your family. As I have said, being a healthy parent means being a better mother, father, brother, sister, and friend, a better person. This is the goal of healthy parenting, to be the best parent and human being that you can be. Going on, as we struggle to parent a child with mental health and addiction issues, it is crucial that we ask ourselves courageous questions. These questions lead to the transformation where we understand the effects of our behaviors on others and on ourselves. Pure accountability asks for nothing in return. The following list of questions may be helpful as you consider your behavior as it relates to your child and can lead to greater connection to ourselves and to our loved ones. And then I have a list that I'll go through. Actually, it's a list in the back of my book. I didn't list it here. Those are the courageous questions section of the book, the resource section of the book. Those are the questions to ask yourself. That's the work of parenting. No matter the story or the situation, the heroic journey is always inward. I love this quote by Alice Miller. Experience has taught us that we have only one enduring weapon in our struggle against mental illness: the emotional discovery of the truth about the unique history of our childhood. We must try, in a long process, to discover our own personal touch, a truth that may cause pain before giving us a new sphere of freedom. If we choose instead to content ourselves with intellectual wisdom, we will remain in the sphere of illusion and self-deception. And then she goes on to say, most people do exactly the opposite without realizing that the past has constantly determined their present actions. They avoid learning anything about their history. And that's what this story has asked of you. It didn't come knocking through the front door, but it did, in a way. This is all that I know about helping children. This is the summary, the overarching. This is what I know. And I don't get paid to be ineffective. I don't get paid to fail at my job. I don't get paid to not facilitate. I get paid to facilitate, to encourage, to support, to inspire change. These are the ways that you do it. And like I said, you might not like it. It might not make all the sense in the world or be intuitive. It might be completely uncomfortable. But if you want to do this, you go to therapy. You go to Al-Anon. You read books. You listen to webinars. You listen to podcasts. You learn how to do this. You make fixing you the project. You do it from a foundation of love. You don't do it from a place of guilt or shame or self-judgment or criticism. You see your humanness and you have compassion and understanding about it, just like you do with your child. That's what I know. That's how to change a child's mind. And when I can show up that way with my children, and sometimes I do better than others, or with your children, or with you, I'm better. You're better. They're better. When I try to aim it, when I try to coerce, when I try to trick it, when I think that I can cheat the system, shortcut it, you can't. You can't fake it. Because the unconscious reads the unconscious. And if I think it's my job to get you to change, it doesn't work. If it's my job to understand you, to love you, to have compassion, for you to make sense, for me to understand your background and how you got there, to validate that, to support that, if I do that, if I make that my work as a father, as a friend, as a therapist, in that context, you can't help but change. You can't help but have the shame and the judgment melt away. You can't help but have your wounds be healed. So that's all I know about helping change a child's minds. I'm happy to go through some questions. The first question, can you please expand on why sharing feelings is the don't category? It is it always? Is it sometimes? It seems to me that it is partially being vulnerable. It's not in the don't category. The sharing feelings isn't in the don't category because it's inappropriate. It's because we don't do that to get somebody to change. Right? That's not the model. If we do that, if I tell my child that I'm upset and I imply that it's their job to change so that I'm not upset, I'm teaching them to be responsible for my feelings. How are they going to know who they are? How are they going to know to say no to their boyfriend later, or to their wife, or to their friend, when their friend or boyfriend or wife or spouse asks them to do something that doesn't resonate with them? They've been wired by me, in this example, to feel responsible for somebody else's feelings. And those people say the same things that I did, which is, I care about you. I love you. You're hurting me. So we're wiring brains to lose themselves, to not know who they are, to be responsible for other. That is fundamentally pathological. And yet it is almost ubiquitous in our culture, that it's our idea that parents are supposed to tell children how upset they are, worried they are, so that the child will change. Absolutely not. We do it to own it. We do it to get clear. We don't hand it to them. And we don't say it over and over again. We might say it once, but we say it and we follow it up with immediately every time with, this is my job. And it's okay to say it's okay to say to a loved one, I'm worried, I'm concerned about this, and I have questions, and I love you. That's different than me handing it to you with the conscious or unconscious implication that you have to change to make me feel okay. That's why it's in that category. It's not inherently good or bad. It's the context, just like a hammer. A hammer is not inherently good or bad. It can be used to kill somebody or put a nail in a wall, piece of wood. So the tool itself has no intrinsic value except for in the hand of somebody who has the right intention, a healthy intention. That's why it's in that category, because we so often use it for the wrong reasons, toward the wrong end. Next question. Our son left a Voc and has been in aftercare since March 1st. He is more oppositional and defiant than ever, refusing to participate in the therapeutic programming or attend the academic portion. While he understands that he has to do the work to progress at the residential treatment center and in turn earn privileges to get home sooner, he prefers to say no to everything. We suspect in part because he wants to do things his way. We've done well on holding the line and not giving in to his attempted guilt trips during our few phone conversations. We are taking care of ourselves and in therapy, but he's not close by to witness this. Just wondering if there's anything we can do to help him. You know, I used to say this in my most difficult cases, and I had about 1,100 students of my own in wilderness therapy before I became the clinical director. So I had about 10 cases that I would put in that most difficult of all time category. And in those cases, I would have the parent write a letter of surrender. I give up trying to change you. I'm going to do my work. I'm going to hold on very, very lightly to the reports about how you're doing. I'm not going to talk about that with you anymore, actually. I'm going to just go do my work. Right? Sometimes they would not write. They'd write a very short letter, a one-sentence letter. Hope you're doing well, love you. Sometimes they would write other students in the group, other clients in the group. Sometimes other clients in the group would write them. But there was a ceremonial and figurative letting go. So I would say let go and let go. Keep letting go. You know, don't ask what can I. This is the irony of this. It's not a punt, but this is the irony of tonight's webinar. Don't try to change him. Let go of that. Try to understand him, like you did in your question. He's doing it his way. It might be for autonomy, it might be for a power struggle, but the way out of a power struggle is out. And it's not. It can start off as technique, but it is really saying, I let go. And with my students, I would do that to them. I would say, you know what? And I wasn't being sarcastic. I would say, you're reminding me that I'm not in control. And sometimes I have the illusion that I am in control. So I'm going to stop really paying attention too closely with your improvement or not. Just going to do my thing, and I'll sit here and listen. So you change it to a listening and understanding. You let go of the power struggle. You let go of him changing. And there might be some kind of ceremonial way to do this, like I just suggested, or you might just do it. But focus on you. Let go of him. You know, when I talk to parents, what I really like what they do is when they tell me when a child is doing something or not doing something unhealthy, they say, so that's his or her issue, but here's how I'm responding to it this time. And that's kind of what you're doing, right? and do more of that thing, of that letting go. Next question. Thank you for the webinar. In my experience, this is something I need to keep hearing on a regular basis. A lot to unpack. That's why I keep watching and learning as a journey. And you know, I know after years of doing this, almost 10 years now, I'm not presenting brand new ideas every week. There's so much overlap and so much of the same things, whether I'm talking about depression or addiction or codependency or boundaries or self-care or a book. But it is part of the benefit of this. And I don't think you have to do this. This is one avenue. It's learning how to think. What does it sound like? And I know for somebody like that first question, it is kind of abstract. Because the solution isn't, some parents said to me last night in San Francisco, in Oakland, Marin County actually, he was giving an example, like, what do I do in this example? And my response is, I can't answer that. Not because I don't know the answer, because I've learned that that's not the right question. Right? The right question is, how are you thinking about it? What's your relationship? You know, in the book, what I discovered that I put in chapter 1 is, the question is not what to do. The question is, who are you? What's your relationship to your child? And what's your relationship to their issues? Those are the questions. What do I do will never solve anything. The question is not, do I get divorced or not? That's never the question. The question is not, do I send my child to Evoke or not? Because if we do those things from a place of trying to control other, we'll never get it right. And if we do those things because it grows out of our own truth, we'll never do it wrong. And if we measure the rightness or wrongness of something by how somebody else responds, in that very instance, right, in that we're surrendering who we are. We're turning the other person into a mirror, to a reflection of us. We're not taking on, as Gandhi says, the heroic task of our own individuation. And of all the people on this planet, the ones that least deserve that responsibility of our individuation are our children. Thanks, folks. Thanks for joining us. The upcoming announcements, we want all parents to attend 6 12-step support group meetings while they're with us. Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, Nar-Anon, or Alateens for Teenagers. NAMI.org, NAMI.org are also a nice resource to go to classes, education, and so forth. Follow us on social media, podcast app, Evoke Therapy programs, or Android devices. Use the SoundCloud app and use Evoke Therapy programs. You can download these webinars, these broadcasts, listen to them on the train while you're driving. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram for stories, inspirational quotes, pictures. Twitter and Instagram at Evoke Therapy, Facebook, Evoke Therapy programs. You can find the Second Nature Alumni Foundation on Facebook. It's a foundation for people who can't afford therapy. You can also go to a blog to find interesting stories, inspirational stories in education. My book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, is available on Amazon. Also, an audio version is available there. You can go to the Parent Alumni Foundation book page on Amazon. That's the URL if you're watching the webinar there. It's part of the Amazon Smiles program. A percentage of those proceeds go to help people who can't afford therapy. Upcoming parent support groups, April 26th in Orange County, May 3rd in New York, May 17th in Seattle, Chicago, May 23rd, New York, June 7th. Email Andrea at evoketherapy.com for more questions or to RSVP. We want all current parents to attend one of the workshops. Very, very, very powerful workshops. Experiential multifamily. The next one is May 27th and 28th at Entrada, our Southern Utah location. You can also, if you want to do deeper work with the programs that I run, the next individual intensive, therapeutic intensive, is April 28th in Park City. Email intensives@evoketherapy.com for more information. Pursuits are high adventure programs for families or young adults. Think of it as sober fun or therapy light with a lot of fun. Last question. I've been able to apply a lot of these concepts to my addicted son, but seem to lapse into old ways with my other son. Is this common? Yes, different children have different triggers, right? Not everybody triggers me the same way. It might be that you over-identify with that son more. You might have, we all, no two children have the same parent. Because the relationship with and where we meet in the middle. So yes, absolutely very common. All right, folks. Next webinar is not, that's today's date. Next webinar will be later this week. We will email you with a topic and time tomorrow. Have a great couple of days. I hope these point of contacts are helpful. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.